The music stopped the moment the glass shattered. Red wine spilled down his chest as the billionaire's wife smirked. "Maybe now you look like you belong here." Cameras flashed. Guests gasped. And the man she'd just drenched in front of the entire gala didn't say a word. He simply looked at her, calm, controlled, unshaken. Minutes later, the same woman who laughed at his silence would be on her knees, begging for mercy as her family's billion-dollar empire collapsed in public. What he revealed next didn't just end a deal. It ended her legacy. The crystal chandelier reflected 1,000 tiny sparks over the ballroom as the evening's elite gathered for the annual Weston Foundation Gala, where money, power, and arrogance filled the air thicker than perfume. Laughter echoed. Glasses clinked. But within minutes, one act would turn that luxury into shame. At the center of it all stood Marcus Reed, quiet, dignified, and observant. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He'd been invited as a keynote donor, a man whose company had quietly funded education programs across the country. Few knew that Marcus also served as chairman of Reed Global Industries, one of the top 5 defense innovators in America. But to Evelyn Hale, the billionaire host's wife, none of that mattered. What she saw was a man she didn't recognize, a man she thought didn't belong among the powerful. "Excuse me," she said, stepping toward him, her tone dripping with disdain. "Are you with catering?" Marcus turned calmly. "No, ma'am. I'm an invited guest." Her laughter cut through the music. "A guest? At a 10,000-a-seat dinner?" She turned to the crowd. "Well, isn't that adorable?" Heads turned. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Marcus remained silent, his composure irritating her even more. "You know," she continued loudly, "some people just don't know when they're out of their depth." Marcus met her eyes. "And some people don't realize when they're out of their character." The tension was electric. A waiter froze mid-step. Cameras tilted discreetly. Evelyn's smile tightened. She reached for a nearby glass of wine. "You must be thirsty," she said. And before anyone could react, she poured the red wine across his chest. Gasps filled the ballroom. The liquid splashed across the marble floor. Silence followed, cold, suffocating silence. Evelyn smirked. "There. Now you look more appropriate for your level." Marcus didn't move. He calmly took a napkin from the table and wiped his hand. Then, in a voice so steady it made the room tremble, he said, "You just made the most expensive mistake of your life." He turned and walked out without raising his voice, without glancing back. Within minutes, social media erupted. Guests had recorded everything, high-definition humiliation broadcast to the world. Wine and ruin trended within an hour. By the time Evelyn's husband, Charles Hale, woke the next morning, the damage had begun. The video had 40 million views, sponsors were pulling out, and the press called it the Gala of Shame. Charles stormed into his study, slamming his phone down. "Do you realize what you've done?" he shouted. Evelyn scoffed. "It's being blown out of proportion. He's not somebody," Charles cut in. "That man you humiliated was Marcus Reed, the CEO of Reed Global, the very company reviewing our $1 billion defense proposal." Evelyn froze. "You're lying." "I wish I was." Before she could respond, his assistant rushed in. "Sir, the Pentagon meeting was canceled. They've blacklisted Hale Aerospace indefinitely." Charles's face turned pale. "Indefinitely?" "Yes, sir. Effective immediately." Charles dropped into his chair, head in his hands. "My God." Meanwhile, in Washington, Marcus sat in a quiet conference room across from the Deputy Secretary of Defense. "Proceed with the decision," he said calmly. "Hale Aerospace no longer meets ethical standards for partnership." The official nodded. "Understood." Marcus stood, straightened his tie, and walked out. No celebration, no satisfaction, just purpose. 2 days later, major outlets broke the story. Defense contract terminated after CEO's wife's racist outburst. Hale Aerospace stock fell 73% in a single afternoon. Charles Hale resigned from his own board to preserve what remained of the family's dignity. Evelyn became the most hated woman on social media, chased by cameras, shamed by sponsors, abandoned by the same people who once cheered her arrogance. For Marcus, the silence that followed was the loudest justice of all. A week later, a news anchor asked him during a televised interview, "Mr. Reed, after all that humiliation, what made you stay silent that night?" Marcus smiled faintly. "Because noise doesn't create change. Dignity does." The clip went viral again, this time as a message, not a scandal. Months later, the Hales sold their mansion to pay mounting lawsuits. Evelyn volunteered at a community shelter as part of her restitution. Cameras followed her, but she looked older, quieter, stripped of the arrogance that once defined her. One evening, as she served dinner at the shelter, Marcus arrived unannounced. He was there delivering new technology donations through his company. Their eyes met for the first time since that night. She froze, unsure whether to speak. He approached calmly. "How are you finding your new role?" Evelyn swallowed hard. "I'm learning what service actually means." He nodded. "Good. Keep learning." She looked down. "I'm sorry." Marcus paused, then said, "You should be. But don't waste the lesson." Then he turned to leave, pausing at the door. "One more thing," he said without looking back. "You were right about one thing that night." Evelyn frowned. "What's that?" "You said I didn't belong there." He looked over his shoulder. "You were right. I belong above it." And with that he walked away, leaving behind the woman whose arrogance cost her everything. A month later, Marcus established the Hale Foundation for Human Integrity, funded entirely by Hale Aerospace's forfeited assets. Its mission, to train leaders in corporate ethics and racial awareness across Fortune 500 companies. At the Foundation's first conference, Marcus addressed the audience of CEOs, lawmakers, and students. Power without character is a loaded weapon. Wealth without empathy is noise. But dignity outlasts everything. Even empires built on arrogance. The room erupted in applause. Outside, reporters waited as he stepped into his car. One called out, "Mr. Reed, do you forgive her?" Marcus looked into the cameras, calm as ever. "Forgiveness isn't for her," he said. "It's for the lesson the world needed to see." As the car pulled away, city lights reflected against the tinted windows. Somewhere behind him, another gala was already being planned, another room full of laughter and ego. But none would forget the night a billionaire's wife poured wine on a man she thought was beneath her, only to drown her own empire in the spill.